A pleasant morning to all of us. I am Mark Jovenji Teofilo and I am one of your reporter for today. My topic is The Chieftest Mourner by Ida Rivera Ford. But before we start the discussion, I have some few reminders for you. Listen carefully and be focused on the discussion and to jot down notes important terms and informations that you might encounter during the discussion. Let us first discuss some background information about the author. Ida Rivera Ford was born on January 22, 1926 in Holosulu. Her parents are Pablo Rivera and Lourdes Consunji. Back then, Pablo Rivera was assigned as judge in Sulu, but in later years, their family lived in other parts of the country like Vigan, Dumaguete, Sorsogon, and Bacolod. She was famously known as a Filipina literary author and described as a clever woman, for she wrote and published numerous works like poems, essays, operatas, plays, and short stories. In 1949, she graduated as cum laude with her degree of AB English in Siliman University, Negros Occidental. In 1954, Ford acquired her master's degree in English Language and Literature at University of Michigan through the Fulbright Grant. Fulbright Grant is a scholarship for exchange students to have research studies in US. In 1958, she was married to Donald Ford, who was then the director of the United States Information Services, and had her son. Through her 5 well-crafted stories, Rivera Ford won the Jules and Avery Hopwood Award for Fiction in 1954. In 1980, she founded the Learning Center of the Arts in Davao City, the first college of fine arts in Mindanao. It was renamed Ford Academy of the Arts Incorporated in 1993. She also worked as a professor and served as a humanities department head in Ateneo de Davao University for 11 years. Her story, The Chieftest Mourner, which has been a staple in many Philippine literature books, was written as a requirement for her baccalaureate. Presently, at the age of 95, Ida Rivera Ford is currently residing at Davao City. Now, we're moving on to the literary analysis of the story The Chieftest Mourner. First are the characters. Denise. She was the author itself and the narrator of the story. She is the niece of Aunt Sofia. The poet, husband of Aunt Sofia, and is known as a famous and a great poet. Aunt Sofia, the niece aunt and the poet's wife, a loyal and a patient wife. Esa, the other woman, a young, accomplished, and a woman of means. There are also other group of characters in the story, like the poet's friends and families, as well as Denise's schoolmates and teachers. The setting. Predominantly, most of the scenes in the story takes place in the funeral of the poet at the chapel. Considering the physical and social conditions presented in the story, it is easily to predict that the characters are somehow wealthy, considering that the narrator, who happens to be the niece of the dead poet, is boarding at the Big Girls College in Manila. The presence of a conference room and the regular use of Spanish language, these are matters that only well-off families can afford and practice that time. This culture-bounded is so reflective up until this day in our society. POV or point of view. The story uses first person as its point of view. The narrator was able to narrate the rivalry between the legal wife and the mistress, as well as the conflicts and the theme of the story. The usage of pronouns I, me, and my give us an idea that the story is in the first-person perspective. We are now moving on to the plot of the story. The story started by the narrator or the niece telling how close she was to his late uncle and considered him as her second father. She reminisces her memories and experiences with her uncle, like in their school, when he saw the picture of her uncle in the board, she can't help but to cry. She received lots of sympathy as her uncle is a well-known and a great poet. That his influence affects how others treated her, like having her work captioned by the niece of the late great poet. While some tell her not to be unhappy about his uncle passing away, because he is now with other great poets. But she knew that his uncle did not only deserted her Aunt Sophia, but also the other woman, and maybe died in her embrace. Her Aunt Sophia always relates the poet as a considerate man when he's sober and tries to make up for his mistakes. She also mentioned that the poet doesn't want to be married as he doesn't see himself as a husband material because of his vices. Not until he finds the beauty of her wife Sophia, which make him change his mind. The poet always went home drunk that his wife can't bear. That is when Sophia tied him in a chair to learn his lesson. This is the time where the poet decided to leave her wife and their home. Time has passed and the poet finds his new woman. The niece serves as a way of communication for the poet and her wife. Aunt Sophia will drop her in the poet's hotel and bond with him. The poet always asks about her aunt and she tells everything about what she observed and know about her aunt. Then the poet will ask him or her to give her letters for his wife. The poet slowly loses his weight and that gives satisfaction to Sophia. For her, it proves that the poet is hurting because of their separation. When the niece turned 11, she overheard her mom and his aunt talking in Spanish, which is why she found her interest in learning the Spanish language. She then knew that Esa, as what her mom and aunt called her, was a young, accomplished, and a woman of means. That this woman won't allow her uncle on his own way. She always follows him and called herself as wife. This gives confusion to people to whether the real wife was her aunt or Esa. When her uncle died, she was puzzled whether who between the two women is the widow. Morning, when she came into the funeral, she saw her aunt sitting in front pews or chapel's chair wearing black and white print clothes. She also saw a woman sitting in other side wearing a black dramatic dress with a long veil. It was Esang, the other woman. This makes his uncle's funeral unusual with two women taking possessions. When she went to the casket to see her uncle, she saw a white flower in a dove shape with words, "From the Loyal One." She knew that it is from the other woman and not from his Aunt Sophia. The poet's friend arrived in the funeral, and she guessed it is a hard decision whether to go to the side of his aunt or to Esa. Most of the girls went to her aunt's side, while some boys went other ways. The high-profile people are also present in the funeral, like the president and other famous poets and the likes. Time passed, and no one between the two women lived. She appreciated his aunt's delicadeza and soon went home when she got hungry. Early the next day, they went back to the chapel and the other woman is not around. But at the afternoon, the woman arrived wearing the same dress she wore. But then, her hair is not tied and her skin glowing up with her eyes still striking. Some of the women in the funeral gossips about the woman. The whisper went louder, good enough for her to hear everything. Their quarrel has started as the sister of the poet asks the woman to leave the place, but the woman refuses. Her Aunt Sophia fought for the peace and solemnity of the funeral, while Elsa fought for her right for her uncle. Esa tells the people about how she sacrificed during the hard times of the poet, that she was the one who is there when he isn't well, selling her jewelries to support him, and went to people and publishers to pay the hospital bills. She then asked them if any one of them went during those times, and now they want her to leave so that they can have the picture together with the president. Sophia answered her, telling that what they want is to honor the dead and to have a peaceful funeral, and that they couldn't go to him in that times because she made lots of scandals for him, and that Esa was there when he is sick. At that moment, the least Esa can do is to leave him in peace. Esa left the place with her mascara running down to his face, but the niece said that it's not funny at all. The conflict is in the type of man versus man. The main conflict of the story is the feud between the two women, whether who deserves to be called as widow and take possessions. What is the theme of the story? Theme of the stories are unconditional love, sacrificial, societal setup, and Spanish influence. Unconditional love and sacrifices are both seen in the character of the other woman. Because of her love for the poet, she sacrifices his belongings like jewelries just to support the needs of him, and even talk to other publishers for the poet's work to be published and use the money for their bills. She also stayed in the side of the poet even in the hardest times. Social setups and Spanish influence are also seen in the story, like a man having two wives and that almost sees the other woman as the bad one. Spanish terms and ways are shown, for example, the word delicadeza and the niece having interest in Spanish language, while innocence can also be one of the theme in the story. Symbolism. The author used multiple symbolism in order to make the story effective, since the plot type is just simple and somehow usual to stories. Aunt Sophia's black and white print clothes symbolize her shallow sympathy and love for the poet, while the mistress' dramatic black outfit pictures out her deepest love and condolences for her husband. The cluster of white flowers that was seen by the poet's niece near the casket with a note from the loyal one definitely is from the mistress. For that, ingeniously fashioned dove-shaped flower defines that features of the mistress. The white flower symbolizes her pure love and loyalty that she had offered to her husband. So what is the moral lesson of the story? In the world of love, you must learn acceptance. You have to accept the reality on how both of you cope with each other with the things you really don't want and hate. Even how it is, for the sake of your relationship, you must accept. But remember, accept but never tolerate. Another is that true love is not always measured with papers. Sometimes, there are people whom you've not related to, or just like the story, Esa not being the real wife but still stayed and cared for the poet even for the hardest times. Someone who is willing to sacrifice just to support him. If we are to base it from the law, it was the legal wife who should be honored. But based on love, the mistress is the one who deserves it more. In the end, the mistress let the legal wife to be the chiefest mourner, and this is what you call real love. How can we relate the story to Filipino culture? We can relate the Filipino culture to this story for it showcases social setups, family issues, and reality. That mistresses are weak in the eyes of most Filipinos. Esa is a victim of cultural production and she was labeled as mistress. Mistress, a product of changing culture where she belongs to. Esa is not aware that she exceeds the way the culture defines the relationship because culture changes from a given period of time. As the time passed by, we can observe that this kind of setup is becoming normal in today's life. Though of course, we are not tolerating or saying that it is a right thing to do. But also, let's not make it a reason to judge and disregard people. Before I end my discussion, I just want to share this quotation from Paul Ferrini. You demonstrate love by giving it unconditionally to yourself, and as you do, you attract others into your life who are able to love you without conditions. Do you think, who really is the Chieftest Mourner? The answer for this question hangs on you. And that concludes my report. Once again, I'm Mark Joven G. Chofilo from BSN English 2B. Thank you for listening, and I hope that you've learned a lot from my report. Have a nice day!